Okay, today we're going to be talking about tree identification. Okay, and so what we'll be doing is identifying trees by their leaf shape. Did you know that leaves come in many different shapes, sizes, and classifications? The study of characteristics is called dendrology. Dendrologists have closely studied patterns in trees and been able to classify them by their common characteristics. We can identify trees by going through a list of questions about the leaf shape, type, and other qualities of the branch and stem. We can use a tool called a dichotomous key. So these are the terms that you will need to understand in order to correctly use a dichotomous key. By the end of this presentation, you will be able to understand what makes leaves unique and have the tools you need to identify any deciduous tree in your area. So a deciduous tree is a tree that changes color and drops its leaves in the fall. Okay, so any tree in your area that has orange or red or yellow, maybe even brown colored leaves on it right now, and those leaves fall down in the fall, is a deciduous tree. Okay, so we're only worried about those kind of trees right now. We're not worried about conifers or pine trees, or some people look at them and think that they're called Christmas trees. Right, we're not worried about those kind of trees right now. We're only talking about deciduous trees. All right, so here are the terms that you need to understand when going through a tool used to identify trees called a dichotomous key. And it basically asks yes or no questions. Is it this or is it that? Is it that or is it this? And it's pretty simple to do because most dichotomous keys come with pictures. But if you don't understand the questions that they're asking, or if you don't understand the terms that they are trying to get at, then it'll be more challenging to determine what kind of tree it is you're trying to identify. So we're going to talk about those terms that are located on a key right now. And the cool thing about this is if you do it correctly, you can almost always identify the tree just based on a couple different characteristics or features. So let's take a look at those features right now. The first one is simple versus compound. Now, a simple leaf, like it looks like in the picture, has a simple single blade. Okay, there's just one blade coming off of the stem or the branch, and that's it. Okay, now a compound leaf has multiple leaves or more than one single blade coming off of the branch, and that's it. Okay, if you can look at the picture there, it's just showing that a compound leaf has more than one leaflet, and a simple leaf is just a single leaf. So that's a pretty huge defining feature actually when it comes to leaves. So I'm going to show some examples of simple versus compound leaves here next. Now, I think the best way to think about this is think about something that you already know that might have to do with the word simple or compound. Somebody earlier I talked to today talked about how you can have a compound word, and compound just means more than one. It's more than one word squished together, and that's kind of what a compound leaf is. It's more than one leaf squished together. So here are some more examples of compound leaves. Here are different ways things can be compound. Things can be palmately compound, and what that means is you can have this middle part here is called a petiole, and the petiole kind of looks like a stem, and something that's palmately compound will have leaflets coming from the middle or a central part of the petiole, but something that is pinnately compound is going to have little pins. You can think about those as little pins or leaflets coming from that center petiole or whatever, right? So here's your little leaflets that are pinnately compound. Some leaves get really crazy with this compound thing, and you have one main petiole and then individual ones branching out from that, and then off of those are where your leaflets are, and that can be double compound. And the honey locust is double compound like that. So it's kind of a cool thing that nature does, where it goes kind of a leaf within a leaf within a leaf, right? So here's some more common compound leaves you're going to see out there. This is a white ash. It has 7 or more leaflets, and all of those are usually about the same size on that leaf right there. So this is a white ash. It's a super common tree in our area, and this is called a black walnut over here. This is a black walnut, and this is also the same thing as the example over here. This is also a black walnut. pinnately compound leaf. And this leaf has sort of a leathery appearance. Each leaf has 14 to 24 leaflets. So this one is going to have more leaflets on it than, let's say, a white ash, maybe about twice as many. The largest leaflets are in the center of the leaf. So you're going to have these new ones here coming up that are going to be smaller, and then these are going to be older ones that have more time to grow, and they're going to be larger, and then there's some smaller ones here. So that's one way to tell whether you're looking at a black walnut. And this is also a pretty common leaf as well. You can also tell black walnuts because there will be these green, sort of very fragrant golf ball shaped things lying around the tree as well. That's another sort of dead giveaway for a black walnut. But you can see that these are compound leaves. They have leaves that come off of the center stem or petiole there. All right, so simple versus compound. One of the first and biggest things to talk about with tree identification. The next one is alternate versus opposite. So as you can see from the picture, things that have opposite branching come from that center stem right there, or branch, and for every leaf on one side, there's going to be one on the other side. It's just one for one, they're directly across. And then the other kind of branching arrangement that we have is called alternate branching. And in this arrangement, we have one on one side, and then it skips a row, and then it goes to the next one, and it's alternate. It goes every other up and down the branch. Now, almost every deciduous tree can be broken down into this category. It's either opposite, left and right, parallel or opposite of each other, or alternate every other. Now, this is talking about leaves that come off of the stem, not leaves that come off of a petiole, right, as we saw before, right? This is not an individual leaf set up here. These are leaflets off of one whole leaf, okay? What this is talking about is the branching of the branch itself, okay? So when you're going out to go find or identify leaves, it might not be enough to just find a single leaf and then identify from there. You might need to find the branch itself that the leaf came from, and then look at that branch and say, well, is there a leaf just like it across from it, or alternate to it on the other side? And this is another example sort of that. And almost every single deciduous tree is going to follow one of those two patterns, okay? Alternate versus opposite. Very important, very key feature to understanding tree identification. All right, so another one we're going to talk about here is leaf margins. And this might be kind of what you think about when you think about leaf shapes. And the margin, like on a piece of paper or on a document, is going to talk about the area around the edge of that leaf, or on a piece of paper around a document, right? Your margin is that border sort of around it. And you have three basic margins or shapes that we're going to talk about, and or you know, leaf profiles or leaf sort of edge treatment. The first is entire, or a smooth margin. And an entire is just going to be one continuous edge that goes all the way around the edge of that leaf. And it can take different shapes, but if it's entire, it's going to just be a continuous edge like this, okay? So entire or smooth, it may also be called at the same time. So that's one, that's pretty obvious. Then we have a tooth margin. And if you can imagine how that would feel with your finger, you can imagine it might be a little rough or maybe pokey if you were to run your finger along that edge, almost like a knife or a saw blade. It would have individual teeth, right? Think of like a shark, right? Pokey, pointy. Now it's just a leaf, so it wouldn't obviously hurt you, but you can imagine how that would feel compared to running your finger along a entire or a smooth leaf margin, right? Those two look similar from a distance, but upon closer inspection, you will note that the tooth leaf has these little teeth or sort of ribs on them. The third kind is a lobed leaf. And if you touch your earlobe, that's kind of what we're talking about, is a little sort of connection or a little sort of finger along the edge, sort of like how your ears have little extensions. Lobed leaf have these little lobes as well. That's one way you can think about it. And lobe leaves have all kinds of different shapes, as we're going to see here in just a minute. But it's one of the most common leaf margins that we're going to focus on at least for this class. So we have entire, toothed, and lobed. Let's take a look at some more examples. Lobe versus toothed leaves. So here's another lobed leaf, and here's a toothed leaf right there, right? And you can kind of get crazy with this and look at all these very specific identifications here. You can have ciliate with very fine hairs of its tooth. You can have crenate with rounded teeth, dentate with symmetrical teeth, denticulate with fine definition, right? There's all kinds of different margin or edge treatment options you can have on a leaf. And that's how kind of specific it can get, right? We're more or less just concerned with, is it lobed, is it toothed, or is it entire, right? So we're not going to get crazy into it, but you can see that there are just a lot of different options, even within the world of those two options, lobed or toothed. There are just countless options you can use to define this. Now, the fun thing about leaf identification is all of these terms, all of these words that we see on here. But if you know a little bit about language or a little bit about words, you can sort of figure out what it is that it's talking about, right? Dentate, think about going to the dentist. The word dent means, or denta means tooth, right? So this is talking about symmetrical tooth or teeth, right? Something that's serrated has stub teeth, like a serrated knife or blade, right? Lobate is talking about things that are lobed, right? You know, sinuate is talking about something that might be a sine wave, right? Go up and down like that, right? So if you can make connections with some of these words to other things that you might know about, I think it'll make remembering these terms a little bit more easy moving forward. That way you don't get things mixed up. So if you can make a connection with something that you know about to one of these definitions, I think it'll make your life a little bit easier. All right, so here's some more leaf margins. Here are some actual examples of leaves that have these different edge treatments. This is a chinkapin oak, and it's lobed, and it has sort of those wave-like lobes. Here's a red oak. This is probably one of the more common leaves that you're going to see when you go out to do your leaf collection. Red oaks are very, very common for our area, and they have these wavy lobes and bristled tips. That's kind of what you're going to notice when you see a red oak. And they have these sharp and pointy edges here, right? Now, a white oak looks very similar to the red oak. It's lobed, obviously, but the edges of the leaf are going to be smooth. They're going to have rounded lobes as opposed to these bristled tips over here, right? And then we have a tulip poplar over here from the tulip tree. And this is a very unique shaped lobe as well. It is sort of its own shape. And almost all the leaves on a tulip poplar are going to look just like this. They're going to look like this sort of like almost four-pointed shape pattern here. It calls it a V tip, right? So there are your different lobe shapes that you're going to see, and these are very common for our area. Moving over to tooth leaves. Now it's very important to note tooth from lobed, right? And I can see how you might confuse this leaf over here of a red oak to, say, a sugar maple. But one key characteristic you can do is you can count the number of lobes or teeth on there to determine which kind of tree it's from. Now, a sugar maple, hopping over real quick, has 5 lobes and toothed edges. Okay, so we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sugar maple leaf is also the leaf on the Canadian flag. You might recognize this shape from that. That's one way of thinking about it, is those 5 points famously right there, right? Now, the sugar maple is not to be confused with the sycamore, which has 3 to 5 shallow lobes and coarsely toothed edges. If you were to hold these up 1 to 1 from a full-grown sycamore tree, this leaf, although it looks very much like the sugar maple, is much larger in real life. This can be 10 to 12 inches in diameter. A sugar maple leaf may only be 5 to 7 inches in diameter when the tree is full grown. So although the shape is very similar, the size comparison will be sort of a stark contrast. Also, the bark, as it says here on a sycamore, is smooth and white or brown and flaky. So you're going to see flakiness on the bark. You've probably seen a sycamore around. It's a very common street tree along neighborhoods and the edges of neighborhoods or sidewalks. It's a very common street tree that you're going to see out there. And the edge of the bark looks like camouflage almost, right? Of course, on a sugar maple, the bark is going to be gray, smooth, or furrowed. So the tree is going to look very different, although their leaves are very similar. However, they both have teeth, right? So here's sort of a more, common teeth leaves that you might see out there. A black cherry, which has dark green, shiny, and finally toothed edges. These tend to turn sort of like a black or almost red color in the fall. And this is an eastern cottonwood. It has a different leaf shape here, but the margin around it has those teeth, as you can see right there. And it's sort of triangular with coarsely toothed edges. And this is a cottonwood. Not quite as common, but you might come across this sort of tree when you're going out to do your tree ID. Here's a couple more: American beech and slippery elm. These are also pretty common trees you're going to see out there as well. But when you're looking at a leaf, just make sure that you're trying to closely examine the edge of that leaf, that margin, to figure out if it's going to be lobed, toothed, or the last one, which is smooth. And some common smooth edge leaves you're going to find out there are the flowering dogwood. I have one of those in my backyard. The leaf is almost egg-shaped here, and the veins are parallel to the leaf edges. So these veins in here are going to be sort of going along those edges and sort of curve and follow that contour. It's a very pretty tree. Right now, it's not like there's flowers on there, but at some point during the tree's life cycle this summer, I'm sure there were flowers, and there were beautiful display of color on that tree. It's a very pretty decorative ornamental tree. And the other kind of really pretty tree out there that has this smooth edge treatment here is the redbud. And you'll see here the leaf is heart-shaped with a thin, very kind of papery texture. And the tree produces these beautiful bright pink flowers in the spring. So another really pretty decorative tree. It's interesting how sort of your more decorative, colorful trees here have these smooth edges. I'm not sure if that's something that has to do with the flowers or something else, but that's interesting that these are both really pretty bright pink and reddish trees. So interesting thing there. There's leaf margins for you. All right, the last thing I think we're going to cover today is this idea of something being palmate versus pinnate. Now, those might be kind of silly words that you might not have much connection to, but if you hold up your hand and you look at it, the palm of your hand right there is kind of like the shape of that palmate leaf, right? You can think of something being palmate as sort of looking like your hand. So if you look at your hand and you think about the word palm and the word palmate, they're connected, right? So palmate looks like your hand or the palm of your hand, okay? And then pinnate, which we talked about earlier with compound leaves, sort of has to do with those pins or those leaves coming off of that middle petiole, right? And something that is pinnate is going to be, compound like this that we talked about earlier, or palmately compound like a clover like we saw earlier as well. But either way, something that's palmate is like this, and something that's pinnate is like that, okay? I think you have time for maybe one more thing here. So here are some more leaf shapes that we're going to see. Obviously, we talked about lobe, and leaf shape has to do with the margins on them. It can also be ovate, and this is a word that if you make a connection to the shape that that looks like this word, it looks like an oval, right? Ovate leaves are sort of almost oval-like, or a perfect oval shape will be just called an oval leaf. Some shapes are an ellipse, so they're elliptic. Some are linear, so they go up and down. Some look like a lance, right? Like from medieval times, like a spear, so they're lanceolate. Some are oblong, right? So there are some other common leaf shapes out there. Now, there are a ton of different leaf shapes. As we'll see, these are some of the more common, typical ones here. But as you can see, there are so many leaf shapes, and we're not going to cover all these. Oblanceolate, obovate, deltoid, obdeltoid, cuneate, rhomboid, all of these, peltate, orbicular. There are just so many different leaf shapes. But a lot of these are going to be from either exotic plants or plants you're not going to see very often around where you live. Sort of the more common ones we're going to talk about or see are ovate leaves, maybe every once in a while a cordate leaf like this, but most likely you're going to see something that is Pentaphyid or palmatophyid, sort of like that palmate or pointed leaf like this. These are sort of your more common leaf shapes that you're going to see when you're going out to identify leaves. All right, so that's actually it. That's all we have time for today in our presentation about leaf shapes. I hope this was informative. I hope you learned something and you have sort of a better understanding of what these terms mean. Now, sort of where the rubber meets the road here is when you go into a dichotomous key, you're going to better understand what these terms actually mean in practice. And so here's a dichotomous key, and it's going to ask you those questions to identify what kind of tree you're talking about. So if you have a leaf in front of you, you can say, well, it's a broadleaf because we're talking about deciduous trees, of course. And now all of a sudden we know these terms, right? We know whether it's simple or compound. And let's pretend we have maybe an ash in front of us. And that's going to be something that is compound. It's going to be more than one leaf coming off of that middle petiole. And those are also pinnately compound. And there you go. It already popped right up. So if the leaf bases are alternate, it's going to be a different kind of tree. But if they are opposite, which they are on an ash, they're going to be just like this. So it's already kind of figured out we have an ash. So we'll click on that, and there we go. There's a picture of your ash tree. So just by going through a couple questions and reading through those terms we just talked about, you can figure out in general what kind of tree you're talking about. Now it might be more than one of 70 different species, but in general, you can say this is an ash tree just by going through those 3 questions, right? So it's interesting that almost every single tree that you're going to see out there is going to follow those sort of steps. It's simple compound, alternate opposite, and maybe even something about the leaf margin, right? But just out of those few questions, a well-made dichotomous key is going to be able to figure out and weed out through what it is you're talking about. So anyways, that's how to identify trees based on some of their different types and characteristics. And hopefully now you have the ability to go out and use a key or use a pamphlet or something like that to figure out any kind of tree around you just using those simple steps. So there you go, guys. Hopefully that was helpful and educational.